You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
This is Ken Vellante with the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast, and for this episode we have Benjamin Gorman, who is a friend of mine and somebody that I know. He's an author, a teacher in Oregon. His books that he's written, works, publishing books, but also his own books are entitled The Sum of Our Gods, Corporate High School, The Digital Storm, and the last one entitled Don't Read This Book. Ben, wanted to welcome you to the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to get you on the show here, Ben, and just kind of chat a bit about the craft of writing and some of the some of our mutual interests around public education and things like that. But prior to getting into some of the bigger issues about art and writing and such, what were you like when you were younger, as a young child?
As a writer, I was kind of spoiled in that my upbringing is a writer's upbringing. My folks are both ministers, so writing was part of their job. And my mom, I remember my first writing experience was my mom taking dictation before I could even write, because I would tell these stories and she was like, you should write these down. And so right away that was encouraged, that was fostered in my household. And I was a weird little kid who very much saw things in a way that lent itself toward later becoming a philosophy major in college. Like even when I was little, I can remember walking around the elementary school playground saying things to myself like, in 200 years, is any of this going to matter? Which is a bizarre thing for a child to be thinking about, or thinking, what if this were a movie, and narrating what was going on to myself, kind of Truman Show-esque, so already I was thinking very much in terms of narrative and storytelling, and that's always been really comfortable for me. So that, then my family, when I was in middle school, moved across the country from San Diego to Cincinnati, Ohio. And no knock on Cincinnati, but it is not culturally like San Diego at all.
No,
and so I showed up as this guy who had surfer clothes and stuff like that. There's no surfing in Cincinnati. I did not fit in at all. And so I kind of retreated into myself very much during high school. I became really introverted and hid in my writing. And so I read voraciously and wrote. I would write all night long. And that was my way of kind of coping. And it wasn't until I went to college that I went, oh, I can be an extrovert. I can choose where I live, and I can befriend people and kind of be an extrovert. But I had to go through my time in the wilderness in Cincinnati and discover my writing voice to some extent there.
Yeah. And, a lot of times I talk in particular with authors and writers, there is that ability to process some of those complicated things, right? Unto yourself in a solitary fashion that really can help during that time. So for you, I mean, was it primarily about about developing, as a writer? When you saw yourself as an artist as you developed and as you got older, you pretty much probably started to see yourself or define yourself as a writer. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, I think going all the way back to that right around the time of that move. So eighth grade, I remember a teacher saying, "Okay, here's your writing prompt, and I want you to go home and write a story." And I went home and wrote 60 pages, which, now as a teacher, I know what she did with that. She looked at it and went, oh, my gosh, I have to read 60 pages. So
sure.
But at the time, I thought, oh, wow, there's something here. I really can produce a lot. And I was really escaping. I mean, it was far from high art at that point. It was these escapist sci-fi stories. It was a way for me to, dodge what was going on in my life and my own feelings to a large degree. And then it became a way to process. And one of the weird things about writing is it is both solitary and social. You're using this art form that you do in isolation in an attempt to reach out to the world. So there's that constant tension of, am I spending too much time in the world and trying to get this out there, trying to meet people, trying to connect, and I'm not devoting myself to this craft, which is solitary? Or am I devoting myself so entirely to the craft that I'm losing touch with the reason that I'm writing in the first place, which is to connect with other people? And so that it wasn't until college that I really started to think about, who is my audience? What am I saying to that audience? Is this, this is for their benefit and not just selfish. So that was a process, an important turning point in the process for me as well.
Yeah, I really like what you had to say there, and basically about the ways of communicating, that there, of course, is that solitary process. But of course, with words, you are trying to get across, that is what, beyond you, or to a lot of people, or maybe millions of people. It matters what your intent is. I was wondering if you had a thought on this question. Having studied philosophy myself, and you had mentioned you had studied philosophy. One of the difficulties I find with philosophers is that they tend to have those thoughts, those very intricate, sophisticated, important thoughts. But they're not always the best at the kind of artistic side of conveying those thoughts. Do you have a philosopher or two that when you look at them as a writer, you say, "Whoa! Not only is this this philosopher, a philosopher, but they're a writer as well." Any philosophers come to mind?
So sometimes it kind of works backwards. Sometimes I'll read a novelist and think, this person really should be taken more seriously as a philosopher. So like Frank Herbert, sure. When you read Frank Herbert's Dune, he's got these epigraphs at the beginning of each chapter, and I'm reading them going, this is a series of really coherent philosophies that he's attributed to these various characters and groups that really should be taken very seriously philosophically. I'm thinking of off the top of my head, gosh, now I'm blanking on Ursula K. Le Guin. And Ursula K. Le Guin should be definitely treated as a philosopher. There was a movement in I'm thinking late 90s, when philosophy started to recognize exactly what you're pointing out, which is that they were getting so into the weeds, into these questions that had no bearing on the society in which they lived. And so I think one of the people who made a real positive contribution in that area was Richard Rorty. And Rorty kind of said, if we're writing stuff that no one can read, that is, it's filled with so much terminology that is not helpful to the general public, then we're wasting our time. So his writing style is far more readable. And then Cornel West does a good job of writing. I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but he is very readable. And so those two kind of jump to mind as people who really write. They're kind of public intellectuals. And then I would say that my favorite right now is Ta-Nehisi Coates. Now, I don't know that he would consider himself a philosopher, but I think he really is doing a lot of, kind of public intellectual kind of work. And his writing is amazing. And I've read his fiction as well. I was actually nervous when he recently had a novel come out. And I was nervous because I was going, this guy, I know he can write. I've read his... And I know he can write fiction. He wrote Black Panther, the comic books, for a while. So I know he can write. But I was like, a novel is a different kind of creature. And is he going to be able to pull this off? And oh boy, can he. His book, The Water Dancer, is astounding. But all of his writing is that kind of philosophical writing that is accessible and at the same time, shows a great deal of care for the craft.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that too, because I hadn't read that book, but I was wondering that myself. I was certainly open-minded and being like, well, let's see how this is. But it's good to hear about the quality of that fiction. I'm definitely gonna.
So good. Well, and if you're like me, like it's the kind of perfect melding of all these things that I'm really interested in, because racial justice is something that really animates a lot of my work and a lot of my life. In fact, I've been protesting about every night for the last few weeks. So So it's something that is, really important to me. And at the same time, I'm a comic book geek. And so he tells a slave narrative, but kind of has the twist of, what if there was a person in the, who was a slave who had the ability to teleport? And so, logically, the first thing you do is you figure out how to teleport out of there. But then to ask the much more challenging question, both of the character and of the reader, would you teleport back and take on the role of a slave again as part of the Underground Railroad to try and free slaves? Wow. And so it's intense. And his description of slavery is harrowing and works all the more effectively because then when the character is wrestling with that question of, do I dare to go back into that, what he's considering returning to. But the way that it presents the white characters, even those involved in the abolition movement, is so important for us to read today because so often you will see people who are, involved in racial justice work, and white people are saying, I am willing to sacrifice even the black people involved in this work for my white agenda. And so, really, he is wrestling with that in a really deep, rich way and making you feel, hey, it's very hard for white people to take a back seat on this issue and, and really work for justice in a way that doesn't involve more white supremacy within the movement itself. So it is absolutely worth your time.
Yeah, and thanks for that. I appreciate your thoughts on that. I want to connect that to a question which is a little bit up ahead, but I'm going to ask you now. In the discussion on the podcast and some important questions around just the role of art. How does it serve? Does it serve an agenda? Does it reinforce ideologies? How does it do that? But I was wondering if you had some comments as far as what you see as the role of art in either disrupting or dismantling or interrogating the issue of, in particular within American society, American racism. What's the role of art?
Yeah. Oh, it's so incredibly important and so complex because, historically, art has been the means by which a lot of racism has been reinforced, whether that was through, one of the first black poets was a poet who was brought in to, share her poetry with George Washington. But the poetry is all saying racism is great. It's been so nice that white people have brought us white culture. And so, even then there was this recognition of black art had its place as long as it reinforced the status quo. And then, throughout our history, the history of minstrelry and black music being used merely as entertainment, and the people producing that music having to make those incredibly difficult decisions where they're saying, on the one hand, I get to be involved in the production of art. I get to be an artist. On the other hand, I have to sacrifice the dignity of doing this work at the behest of people who don't treat me as fully human. So art is incredibly important in both, maintaining our racism and challenging our racism. And I think one of the things that white artists really need to think about very carefully is, in what ways are we participating in both? In what ways are we making things normative? And beyond race, it goes to all kinds of things. In what ways am I reinforcing sexism by describing the world that I'm in and making that normative? In what ways am I reinforcing homophobia if I am describing gender identity as I understand it right now, which 50 years from now will look archaic, And so those kinds of questions, I wrestle a lot with those. I think about a lot about what in my work is challenging our current understandings of race. What in my work is reinforcing those? What is merely describing the way that the world works right now, and especially in the United States? So it is really tricky. I think artists absolutely have a responsibility to be engaged in shaking up their society in every way. That's a part of what art does. Art should be rebellious. At some really fundamental level. We describe the world and comment on it, which means we are saying, I'm not merely accepting this. This is the way things are, and this is the way things should be. And there should be a tension there. That being said, just the act of describing the world is normative. And so we need to really be thoughtful about the ways that we describe the world. The other thing that I run into personally all the time is that as a white male, just speaking might be crowding out other voices. And so I'm really cognizant of that. I do my best to make sure that I am spending a lot of energy promoting voices other than my own. Because if I'm saying, read my books, read my books, read my books, and somebody decides to invest their time to read my books, during that time, they are not reading a Black author. And so I would feel terrible if I were, responsible for, other voices being pushed out, because the world has heard far too much from old white men. So I own a small press, and we really have made a very intentional, concerted effort to publish more women, more LGBTQ folks, more people of color, so that I am investing my time and energy in promoting voices other than my own. I think that's a key part of kind of changing not just the publishing industry, but changing the voices that people are exposed to.
Yeah, and I see that within, and I certainly appreciate your comments. I see that within your publishing too, and it's noticeable, and it's important just to point out, and just as far as about what we consider what is published, what is seen, and a lot that isn't seen. And publishing has always been vitally important in making those choices. So I appreciate your comments around that. And
publishing historically, because publishing is this intersection of art and commerce, it's inherently conservative. Publishers are always thinking to themselves, okay, well, we also need to make money. So we want to put art out into the world, but we need to pay the bills. And then what they do is they look back and they say, well, what paid the bills last year? What worked? And what worked the year before that? And what worked the year before that? And so there's always this looking backwards. And by its nature, if everybody does that, they end up going, well, I guess we're just going to keep putting out Shakespeare and Homer. Like, it's all going to be dead white guys, because that's what worked in the past. So it really takes people who are brave, who will say, this didn't sell last year, but maybe it will next year. And I believe it should. This is art that the world needs, rather than art that is a guaranteed, it'll keep the lights on. And that the biggest publishing companies, unfortunately, are the least likely to do that, because they've got the most in the way of bills to pay. And so they are always going to be, looking backwards. Even this next year, we're going to see a lot more interest in Black authors, because Black authors had a moment where they totally swept the New York Times bestseller list. It was so wonderful to see. Like, it absolutely made my day.
Right.
And I guarantee next year, those publishing companies are going to go, that worked. What they're not going to do is say, oh, okay, that worked. So what pushes beyond that? We need more Latinx authors. We need to hear more from Asian Americans. We need to hear more from, we need different voices. They're going to always go, what worked in the past? And so a real small press like mine can be nimble enough, because we don't have to make money. In many years, we don't. So I can say, this might not be something that will be financially successful, but I think this is a voice that really needs to get out there.
Yeah, and I appreciate your thoughts on the background, as far as just what you're trying to do with opening up that space. I have another question, Ben, about the role of art. What's the role of art in a pandemic? What's the role of art now? Have you, as an artist related to this, found yourself questioning this area, or trying to figure out what to do or what not to do as an artist?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think many artists like me are finding the same thing, where they're struggling to say, how do I create art in this time? And at the same time, they're saying, but I can't not, because I'm an artist. It's become part of my identity, and it's a compulsion. So I'm going to create art, but I'm not sure how it fits in this world. And maybe that's actually ideal, because so much of what this COVID has presented us with is just a mountain of uncertainty. And so even reflecting that in our art, it might be entirely appropriate to say we are not sure how to reflect this world, how to engage with this world right now, because I am describing a world of uncertainty. For me, what I started doing, I started writing a novel. For the first time in my life, I'm writing multiple books at the same time, which is one of those things that lots of authors recommended to me. They said, oh, yeah, never just work on one at a time. And I dismissed it. I just went, oh, no, that's not my process. That's fine that works for you, but I need to focus on one at a time. And now I'm trying it. I'm going, oh, yeah, it turns out those folks really knew what they were talking about, because it's really nice to be able to go, I'm not feeling this one today. I'm hopping to this other project. Oh, I'm not feeling this one. I'm hopping to this other. So that has made me more productive. And so I'm cranking out 3 books at a time. But one of them is about a guy who is on a spaceship. I'm a sci-fi author. He's on a spaceship. There is a virus that is loose on this giant ship, and he is quarantined to his cabin. And so it reflects that whole, how it feels to be stuck, and just resets it in a new space. Sure. And then there's, the plot, and, he does get out, and it gets into some deeper things. There are folks on the ship who are saying the virus isn't real. And so it allows me to really play with this idea of propaganda and how deadly that propaganda is in a time of a pandemic. And at the same time, it's on a spaceship. So it provides that remove. We can go, oh, this is a story. It's not just a video of somebody, not wearing a mask and screaming strange conspiracy theories in our world. But I hope that, and it's not a huge leap for a reader to easily make that connection. So that's one that I'm really enjoying playing with right now.
Well, and on that too, I want to jump in a tiny bit on the science fiction. I know you brought up in both you as a science fiction writer, and Ursula Le Guin that you had mentioned. I'm a big science fiction fan myself, also comic books. And one of the things I find is that those who are into these genres know that some of the more controversial or difficult themes around race or environmental issues, things like that, sometimes have had more fertile ground in science fiction for a longer amount of time. It's just been that space for it develop. And I think one of the things, and I'd like to hear your comments, I think sometimes when almost these secrets, or you encounter these type of texts and you tell others about it, you sometimes wonder, is like, hey, don't you know what's happening? Don't you know what Ursula, Le Guin was talking about, like, for this amount of time?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
so
I've had many people who will say, like, oh, I don't like science fiction. And then you'll start to kind of interrogate that a little bit, and they'll go, and you'll find out, oh, they did read 1984, and they read Brave New World, and they read The Road, and okay, well, you've read a lot of science fiction, So I think part of it is people have a perception of what science fiction is that is not necessarily connected to the actual experience of reading science fiction. And the same thing with comic books. They'll go, oh, I don't like comic books, and then you find out that they've seen every comic book movie. They know the characters backwards and forwards. They're so ingrained in our culture. They can make Batman and Bane jokes. They just don't realize they are comic book fans too, because they're not engaging with comic books, in print form. So I think that the comic books comic books are to some extent our national religion. They are the way that we have processed, in the way that lots of other cultures had a pantheon of gods. We have comic book characters, and they allow us to explore a lot of things that ancient religions explored through their pantheon of gods. And then science fiction allows us to do futurism in a comfortable way. It allows us to say, what if? And that's really vital. If we're going to be a thoughtful people, we're going to be a people who imagine what the world could be like. And often those kinds of things get dismissed. People will just go, oh, science fiction and comic books, those are for kids. I'm like, really? Thinking about the way the world should be absolutely needs to be an adult endeavor. Like, we need to be thinking about the kind of world we might like to create. and thinking about, how we feel. And one of the things comic books allow us to do is to think about how we feel about really huge questions of especially identity. So much of comic books are about who is this person versus who are they really? Is the hero underneath the mask? Who is how does the character present themselves? And so it's a great opportunity for metaphors about race, about sexual identity. Not revealing who you really are is a lot of what LGBTQ folks wrestle with, especially in their younger lives. And so the comic books offer really fertile ground for asking really difficult questions about how do we feel about those kinds of questions.
Yeah, I really like your comments there, and I've definitely felt that dynamic. And you see it, I think, within comic books. There's the typical narrative with Marvel comics, that's been around with being more maybe cutting edge in the typology of who heroes are, right, within Marvel compared to old DC ones. But you see a lot of independent comics publishers now really just trying to just really change what comics look like and the type of discussions that they're going to get into. And again, it's a small publisher. Sometimes it's a small publisher dynamic that helps create that. It doesn't always come from or sometimes rarely comes from your standard media, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, Marvel and DC are both so big that they have to, employ a lot of people and pay the bills. And so what they'll often do is something will come out in an indie form that's really edgy. And then Marvel and DC will wait until they know it's a safe bet, and then they'll buy it. And so that's where some of the coolest stuff that's coming out from them comes from, is it started off as an indie, or the artist really got their start doing indie work. And then once Marvel was pretty sure that instead of a comic book about a muscle-bound hero who goes around punching muscle-bound bad guys, what about a little girl who has a pet Tyrannosaurus? And they're
sure.
like, no way, that's going to fly. And then once they see, oh, people love this artist's work, now let's go get, pick that artist up. So that's how a lot of that kind of stuff gets into those and even they're looking for edgy stuff, but they've got to make sure that it kind of fits in the brand a little bit. But yeah, comics, Marvel's been, asking difficult questions about race since, X-Men and Black Panther, going back to the 60s. So they've really been pushing, and they were able to do so because a lot of adults kind of weren't paying attention. And so they were able to get kids to back when they were more for kids, to really think about some things, and their parents may have been really disturbed by what their kids were contemplating, but they didn't take it seriously enough to find out. So good for them.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments there, and definitely share a lot of the joy of that art form. Hey, Ben, I wanted to ask you. I'd asked you if you could maybe give a little bit of a background to a piece, if you could read as part of the program a piece of yours that you've written. I was wondering if you could take a few minutes to do that, kind of tell us a little bit of the background, and just give us a little bit of your writing.
Absolutely. So the piece I'm going to read, I went back and forth. A lot of the work that I've got doesn't fit into, a short reading. And so I was looking for an excerpt that would fit time-wise. And I think the best one that kind of stands alone and gives folks a good feel is from Corporate High School. Now, the trick here for your listeners is my voice does not fit. So the protagonist of this story is 17. She's female. She's black. She's very, very different from me. So you have to use your imagination a little bit and imagine that this is coming to you in a voice other than that of a 43-year-old white guy.
Yeah. But, so this is radio. This is radio. So yeah, absolutely.
Right. So people can use their imaginations here a little bit. But the premise here, this is very near the beginning of Corporate High School, and the character Harriet she's about to start at a new corporate high school. She's had to travel across the country because her mother has been arrested, and they are moving to be nearer to the corporate jail. Everything is run by the same corporation, and so she's they're moving nearer to mom, and therefore she has to start at a new school. So this is the night before she starts the school. Tomorrow's my first day at a new school, so of course I'm nervous. I'm a wreck. It affects everything I do. Like, I want to eat, but when I think about grabbing one of the cookies we bought on the train, then I think about not fitting into my jeans for the first day, and I walk around the kitchen in a little circle 3 times like a nervous dog. Then I give up on the cookies, come back to my suitcase, and try to pick out my clothes again. And that's a whole other nightmare. But I've taken a break from that task for too long now, so I'm diving in again. Okay, I think I've got my outfit picked out. I think it's a lot harder for girls than for guys. It's 2114, so you'd think we'd be past that kind of sexism, but it's still there. When guys go clothes shopping, Corpmart basically gives them 3 choices of looks. They can get sports clothes, hunting clothes, and rock and roll clothes. The sports clothes are sweatpants or athletic shorts and t-shirts with the logos of sports teams on them. The hunting clothes are camo jeans and camo shirts or t-shirts with pictures of animals on them. The rock and roll clothes are black or blue jeans and t-shirts with the logos of bands on them. Those are the options. Guys can be jocks or hunters or musicians. If they want to be interesting, they can mix and match. Their outfits can say, I like this band, but my camo pants tell you I'm a really aggressive fan. Or, these sweatpants tell you I like sports, but the animals on my shirt tell you I mostly play hunting video games. Or, I'm wearing this team shirt because I like to watch football on TV, but these baggy jeans tell you I'm a cool, casual fan. There are maybe 9 other combinations, but that's basically it. Girls' clothes are so much more difficult because even though the corporation wants to put us into 3 groups, they all get complicated by the sizes we can buy. The young women's department has clothes for girls who want to look sexy fashionable, sexy athletic, and not sexy religious. But if you mix and match those, there are millions of messages you can send. Plus, it's totally okay for a girl to buy stuff in the young men's department, but if a guy does that, even in 2114, people are not cool with that. I don't think it's homophobia as much as a kind of horrified reaction that a guy doesn't want to fit in. But if a girl goes into the young men's department, it's like she's just looking for a new way to fit in, and people are okay with that, which is unfair. It also means girls have even more choices to make when they're trying to decide what kind of messages to send. Like, if I got boys' jeans that were really loose, that could mean I'm really casual about things, or it could mean I'm trying to rebel against gender stereotypes, or maybe that I like video games and don't play sports. If I paired them with a tight athletic top over a sports bra, it could mean I'm athletic, but also really conservative, and I'm hiding some tight athletic shorts underneath. Or it could mean I'm athletic, but I'm interested in guys who aren't. Or a dozen other things. Or I could get really tight white jeans in the sexy fashionable part of the young women's section, and then pair them with a loose rock and roll t-shirt from the young men's section, and that could mean I'm on the cutting edge of fashion, and I'm artistic, or that I'm a band groupie turbo slut, or, if it's a Christian band, that I'm one of those sexy for Jesus girls, and the white is a sign of purity and the tight is a sign of sexy. Of course, white jeans would also send the message that I'm the kind of girl who never spills anything and doesn't ever feel nervous about getting her period, and that is definitely not me because I'm anxious about everything all the time, which is why I don't own any white jeans. So here's what I picked. For a top, I'm going to wear a t-shirt from a band in Illinois. The band is called Go Go Dr. Claw, a reference to a cartoon show from the last century that I've never seen before, but the shirt is black and tight but not too tight, with a little cut at the neckline that's long but not too long, so it hints at the cleavage I don't really have, but doesn't actually show that I don't have any. Besides the cut, I like the shirt because it's rock and roll, but they don't have it at Corpmart, which pretty much sums up my taste in music. For pants, I'm wearing these black and gray camo cargos that are too big for me. I'm skinny, so they ride low on my hips, showing off my best feature, my waistline, and hiding the fact that I don't have much in the way of hips or ass. Plus, because they're so loose, it might look like I'm the kind of person who doesn't really care that what she wears and just grabbed something crumpled up next to the bed she rolled out of in the morning. I would like to pretend to be her, rather than the person who spent more than an hour trying to figure out what to wear tomorrow. Come to think of it, I'm going to throw them in a pile next to my bed right now, so they have the right wrinkles and not the ones from the suitcase. Probably no one would notice that, but I would spend all day imagining that they were all noticing. Done. Balled up and crumpled on the far side of one of the hotel room's beds. I have to share a room with my dad until he gets us an apartment, and that could take a few days. He wouldn't like me tossing my clothes on the floor. He'd probably accept it if I explained why, or he'd grumble about how crazy teenage girls are and let me leave them there, but it's not worth trying to explain it. It's better if he just doesn't notice them. The most important part of the outfit is the part no one will see. It's the necklace that Selena gave me. She's my best friend in Illinois. They have a machine at Corpmart that will print military-style dog tags with whatever you want on them. She got me one that says, "Love you, hermanita negrita, Selena." That's what she has called me since we became friends in first grade because I have dark skin and she speaks Spanish. Selena's fourth-generation American. Or as she likes to say, my people came here as illegal immigrants back when Americans were treating illegals like shit. Back before Americans were illegal immigrants in Canada. That's how she talks. I miss her. It's only been a couple of days, but I wish she were here so bad. I wish she could go to the new school with me tomorrow. She'd protect me. She's shorter than I am now, but she's so ballsy that if anybody looked at me sideways, she'd get right up in their face and use every word in the corporate school's forbidden word list in 2 languages. And it's a long list of words. Instead, if anybody looks at me sideways, I'll just touch the necklace and know she's got my back. Maybe that will give me a little bit of courage. Right now, I need it.
Thanks, Ben. And that was from Corporate High School?
Yes, so that's from Corporate High School, a novel about a world where one corporation has taken over all of the schools, and by taking over the schools has taken over the world. Because if you can train all the kids to believe that corporations should run everything, then you run everything.
Thanks for reading that. I enjoyed that. And I just love to have a lot more lately where, authors and singers and such can share kind of directly the stuff that you're working on. Share those art pieces. I want to move to a big question, Ben, which as a philosopher you'll be okay with. What is art?
I love this question. It is huge. So I think for me, and I know there are very different opinions about this, but for me, art is the communicative exercise by which we create community. So we are trying to communicate with other people in order to create a shared experience and that we create a community around. And so that has a lot of component parts. Like art does have to be to some extent entertaining. Even the kind of art that is, aggressive and that is, trying to be objectionable, tries to be objectionable in such a way as to include at least some people into it. So if I'm screaming at one group, I am saying to another group, join me in screaming at that other group. So there is something about it that is always supposed to be entertaining. We are trying to welcome people in to create a community. And then we've got to have something to say. We're saying, okay, now that we're joined in this way, this is something that bonds us. And that could be ideas, and that could be just the entertainment experience. But in some way, we're creating, a shared experience. And I think that, and then once we've created that experience, art serves the function of joining us towards some kind of common purpose. And that can be wonderful. I don't want to be hyperbolic, but I think anything people do together, art can do, if that makes sense. Art is what joins us so that we can accomplish the things that human beings in concert can accomplish. And so, we have put human beings on the moon. I very much hope we will put people on Mars. That it is not an exaggeration to say art played a big role in that, in making people believe that was possible, in bringing together the people who did that. Art may also bring together the people who literally will destroy this world. And so, collective action by human beings is not always good. And art can definitely participate in the worst of human action as well. But art is the thing that joins us.
Yeah, in listening to your definition, I definitely thought about a lot of the implications, for, art through politics, art's ability to organize, express, and like you said, there's a popular element, to your definition that you have to be communicating something to somebody and making some connection that way, and that connection can go in different directions, to put it in. Yeah.
Well, and I come across, I have come across artists who don't want to think about audience at all, who do not really have any interest. They will say, I don't care if this, if anybody reads what I write. And I'll say, well, then keep a diary. You do need to be thinking about your audience. You do need to care enough. And one of the things I tell my students is, if somebody chooses to read your writing, they are giving you the single most valuable thing they can ever possibly possess, time. And you owe them. You owe them to do all the legwork to give them something that is worthy of that time. So I do think that artists have a giant responsibility, not just socially, not just to say this is the way the world should be. Even if we're writing something that's really light, or creating something, creating a dance or music that's merely for entertainment, we still have a responsibility to do it in such a way that it is worthy of the time of the people who watch that dance or listen to that song. Like we have to be worth that.
Yeah, and taking the audience into consideration, that brings up that whole other dynamic. And I think you're right. I think there's strong views around, I think you could easily talk to an artist that does express the strong view of saying, I don't know what's out there in the world. This came from me, and receive it as you will, right? Versus the fact that you do have to consider a lot of times that you're trying to do or say something or other with what you're creating. One of the just a couple more questions, Ben, but related to that is the question of why do you create art, right? And I found that recently asking this question, within the pandemic, that general question of what you do with your time. Do you ever step back and say, why am I writing this book, or what am I trying to express with this? The general question of why you're trying to create the art that you do.
Oh gosh, yes. Well, I'm kind of a rolling ball of anxiety, and so I'm constantly second guessing myself. And I think, like so many artists, I really struggle with imposter syndrome. I think as soon as I turn my back, everybody goes, that guy actually thinks he's an artist. Like he thinks he thinks he's a writer. So I think I expect that there are a lot of artists who really struggle with that. So yeah, I'm constantly thinking, is this worthwhile? Am I wasting my time? And I'll revert back to that, second grader who's wandering around the playground saying, is any of this going to matter in 200 years? I can easily fall into that trap. It's very natural for me to go, maybe none of this matters. And then I have to remind myself, actually remind myself might not even be the right way to say it, because maybe it's justifying to myself. Part of it, I'm not sure, in all honesty, if I write out of a sense of compulsion. If I write because I'm a writer and I love it and it's what I do, and therefore I would do it anyway, and then I justify it to myself that I'm trying to do something valuable with that writing, or if it's the other way around. Is it that I want to do something, in the world that's positive, and because I'm a writer, that becomes my outlet? I don't know which way it goes, and it could be that I am, that I can't consciously know. Because it could be that I am justifying, the inverse to myself. But I do try and think about, how could this be received? How could this be valuable to readers, and engage in a larger conversation? And it depends on the art that I'm working with. Right now, I'm working on a book of poetry, and it's very intimate kind of work in terms of this is the kind of work that I want somebody to pick up the book of poetry and go, I feel a one-on-one connection with this poet. This is somebody I know.
Sure.
Now. And so it's not personal. A lot of social themes. It's very, very personal. Whereas, some of my my larger works, my most recent novel that came out, Don't Read This Book, is absolutely about asking, some of the absolute biggest questions I could think of. It's a book essentially about death and identity. Can people who have been, specifically, straight white males who have been told that what we do always wins, possibly comprehend death? Or if we actually thought about death, would it paralyze us? And so it's asking some big questions in the context of a book about vampires and werewolves and a golem and
yeah.
But that's I love these funny characters. The King of Trolls is absolutely fucking hysterical. Like, I love these kind of fun characters, but the questions that they're posing are really big ones in some cases. And then in some cases, like the book of poetry, I'm just saying, like, hey, I'm here. Does anybody else feel that?
Right. Well, speaking of big questions, how about this one? Why is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah, the biggest question. And like a good philosopher, I would break that down, right? So
right.
So the presupposition there is that there is something rather than nothing, and I will stipulate that I do believe that. My conception of the fact that there is something rather than nothing, though, is pretty limited. So I'm deeply agnostic. And so I do not know what the nature of the reality that I inhabit even is. I don't pretend, I do not feign certainty. So I think even like the cogito is fundamentally bullshit. Like, I think therefore I am. Nope, that's not logical. I think therefore there's a thinker is probably as far as we can go from there. Or I think therefore I think. So is there an experience that there is someone having? Yes, like that is the experience that I am conscious of. What is the nature of that reality? I am not 100% confident that there is a material world. I think that is beyond what is knowable. That's noumenal and not phenomenal. So in the phenomena that I experience, let's say there is something, but I can't tell you what it is, right? So then the question is, why does that exist? And within the sphere of the phenomena, so within what I have experienced, what justifies the existence within this sphere, I do not know. There very well could be something outside of my experience that says this is why we created this, but I am somebody who, used to have a deep religious faith and totally lost it. And so I don't know why this existence persists, why I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing. Within this sphere, I am trying to make this world as good a place as I can make it. If I presuppose that other people exist, then from there, I want them to have the best experience they can have. But it is, for me, there's a lot of unknowns, and I am learning kind of on a day-to-day basis how to make choices without certainty. So without knowing that other people exist, how can I make their experience as good as possible? Without knowing that this universe exists beyond the phenomena that I'm experiencing, how can I make it the best universe for my son to live in that I possibly can? Assuming he is experiencing the same phenomena, I want his to be a real positive experience. But it's not based on, some kind of concrete material certainty for me.
Yeah, and you view it even within that, and listening to your explanation, and you look at it in a very moral way, which brings in a very interesting dimension to it. It's kind of like, how do I exist here and how do I interact with others, which definitely connects back to the discussion we talked about within politics and art. Hey, Ben, can you let the listeners know the best way to connect with you in your art and your publishing company, so they can find you and the other works that you support? Sure.
So the best way, the way that I wish everybody would do it is through your local independent bookstore. Independent bookstores are really hurting right now. And so if you've got a local independent bookstore that is advertising that they are doing deliveries, some of them are doing deliveries, a lot of them are doing, outside the door contactless pickup, please give them a call, order my books. They'll set them out in front of the door, in front of the building, and you can go get them, and you can keep those places alive. If you are also, if you're like me and you're buying a lot of stuff on Amazon, and no judgment, all my books are on Amazon, Powell's, Barnes and Noble, so whatever is your online bookstore of choice. But I do encourage folks to check out. You will, probably pay a premium because you are helping that independent bookstore live, but that's a good thing to have in your community. So if you've got one, go that way. In terms of just other stuff that I'm up to, I'm on Twitter and Instagram. Both of my handles are at Teacher Gorman, all one word. So Teacher Gorman, Instagram and Twitter. And I'm on, I've got an author page on Facebook, and I'm real active there. But Twitter tends to be my favorite lately because that's where I'm getting the most up-to-the-minute news on the world falling apart. So I've been paying a lot of attention to Twitter lately.
Oh man. Hey, Ben, I just want to let you know, I appreciate your work as a public school teacher, working in the labor movement. working in important ways and advocating for folks. I just want to let you know I appreciate that and really enjoyed spending the time and getting to know a little bit more about your thoughts on some big questions. So thanks
you for all of the help you gave to all of us in the labor movement with your work in the labor movement. That's absolutely vital, and we are it's an uphill battle a lot of the time, but we're fighting for not just workers, but for everyone that those workers serves, and for us, that's our kids. So I feel very inspired by the work that we get to do. We're lucky. It's an honor to get to serve the next generation.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ben. Hey, you know what the thing is too, Ben? We're going to win. I'll tell you that too. We're going to win.
Yeah. Well, in the long run, the arc of history, it does bend toward justice. A society cannot persist that doesn't take care of its children. And so we'll either figure that out or we won't be here. we win or we perish.
Yep, absolutely. Hey, thanks, Ben Gorman. Thanks for your time on the podcast, and hope to hear from you soon.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
All right, bye now.
Bye-bye.
You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing.